Imagine living in a world where people still believe thunder was thrown by gods, diseases were curses, and reality itself was made from divine mystery. Then suddenly one man appears and says, everything in existence is made from four elements. The universe is governed by forces of attraction and separation. Animals evolve through combination of body parts. And by the way, I might actually be divine. That man was Empedocles, one of the most strangest, most brilliant, and most theatrical philosophers of the ancient world. He was part scientist, part poet, part prophet, part political revolutionary, and maybe part cult leader. His ideas would influence science, medicine, religion, alchemy, and philosophy for over 2,000 years. And unlike many philosophers who quietly wrote books in libraries, Empedocles reportedly wore purple robes, bronze sandals, and a golden crown while wandering through cities performing miracles. Some ancient writers claim he could stop winds, heal diseases, and raise the dead. Others thought he was insane. But beneath all the myth and spectacle was a thinker whose ideas were shockingly ahead of their time. This is the story of Empedocles, the philosopher of fire, love, chaos, reincarnation, and cosmic cycles. To understand Empedocles, we first need to understand the philosophical crisis happening in ancient Greece. Before him came philosophers trying to answer one massive question: what is reality actually made of? Thales said everything comes from water. Anaximenes says no, everything comes from air. Heraclitus says reality is constant change and flux. Parmenides says change is impossible. And this created a gigantic philosophical problem, because if Parmenides was right, then motion, birth, death, growth, and change are all illusions. But obviously things seem to change. Trees grow, people age, fire burns, animals die. So how do you reconcile change with permanence? Empedocles enters the stage with one of the most influential answers in intellectual history. Empedocles rejected the idea that everything comes from one substance. Instead, he proposed that reality is composed of four eternal roots, not elements in the modern chemical sense, but fundamental substances. They were earth, water, air, fire. This idea became one of the most influential theories in Western history. For over 2,000 years, medicine, alchemy, and natural philosophy were built around these four elements. Even today, fantasy worlds, astrology, and pop culture still use them. But here's the genius part. Empedocles said the elements themselves never change. Instead, they mix and separate. Wood burns because fire separates from the mixture. Plants grow because elements combine in new proportions. Humans die because the mixture dissolves. In other words, nothing truly comes into existence, nothing truly disappears. Things only recombined. That sounds pretty modern. It resembles conservation principles in science, matter transforming rather than appearing from nothing. And this was his solution to Parmenides. Change is real, but the underlying substances remain eternal. But Empedocles wasn't done, because he still needed to explain why do the elements combine or separate. His answer was two cosmic forces govern the universe: love and strife. Love pulls things together, strife tears things apart. This was not merely emotional love, it was a universal force of attraction. Likewise, strife was a force of division and conflict. Suddenly, Empedocles had created one of the earliest systems resembling physical forces, a primitive vision of attraction and repulsion. Some historians even compare it loosely to later scientific ideas like gravity and electromagnetism, not because it's scientifically equivalent, but because it tries to explain nature through impersonal forces instead of mythological gods. Empedocles believed the universe moves in an eternal cycle. At one extreme, love completely dominates. Everything merges into perfect unity. A divine cosmic spirit exists in total harmony. Then strife slowly enters. Separation begins. The elements divide. The world forms. Stars appear. Oceans form. Life emerges. Eventually, strife dominates entirely. Everything fragments into chaos. Then slowly, love returns. And the cycle repeats forever. Unity into separation, chaos, and reunion. The idea is astonishingly ambitious. He wasn't merely explaining weather or biology, he was explaining the entire cosmos. Creation, destruction, life, death, order, and chaos. All through eternal cycles. No beginning, no final end, just infinite transformation. Empedocles proposed one of the strangest proto-evolutionary theories in ancient history. He imagined that in the early world, random body parts emerged independently: arms without shoulders, eyes without faces, heads without necks. Eventually, these parts combined into creatures. Some combinations survived, others failed. Creatures poorly suited to life disappeared. Successful forms remained. That sounds pretty bizarre, but buried underneath this mythic imagery is a primitive idea resembling natural selection. Not Darwinian evolution, not even close in scientific precision, but a remarkable attempt to explain life through natural processes rather than divine design. This was around the 5th century BCE, over 2,000 years before Charles Darwin. But Empedocles wasn't just a philosopher. He was deeply religious and mystical. He believed in reincarnation. He claimed souls are trapped in cycles of rebirth because of spiritual impurity. Humans, animals, and even plants were interconnected through transmigration of souls. According to fragments of his writings, he once claimed, "For I have been already boy and girl, bush and bird, and mute fish in the sea." That sounds almost Hindu or Buddhist, and many scholars notice striking similarities between Empedocles and Eastern mystical traditions, though direct influence is uncertain. He also condemned animal sacrifice, because the animal you kill might contain the soul of someone reborn. Imagine hearing this in ancient Greece, where animal sacrifice was central to their religion. Empedocles was radically unconventional. Ancient writers describe Empedocles almost like a mythological figure. He supposedly wore purple robes, long flowing hair, a golden girdle, and bronze sandals. He traveled dramatically through cities while crowds followed him. Some believed he performed miracles, others said he controlled weather. There were stories of him curing plagues and stopping winds. Now, were those stories true? Probably exaggerated. Ancient philosophers often become legendary figures after their death. But the important point is this: Empedocles intentionally cultivated an aura of divine mystery. He did not present himself as a humble thinker. He presented himself almost like a semi-divine sage. At one point he reportedly declared, "I walk among you as an immortal god, no longer mortal." That's an absolute insane line, and yet it perfectly captures Empedocles. Half genius, half mystic, half performer. That's three halves. That also feels appropriate somehow. Empedocles was also politically active. He lived in Archragas, a wealthy city in Greek in Sicily. Ancient accounts suggest he opposed tyranny and supported democratic ideals. Some reports claim he rejected kinship when offered political power. Whether entirely true or partly legendary, he became associated with anti-tyrannical policies and public reform. This matters because Greek philosophers weren't merely abstract thinkers. Their ideas were deeply tied to society and power. Philosophy was political, and Empedocles appears to have seen himself as both spiritual guide and civic reformer. Now we arrive at one of the most famous death stories in philosophy. According to legend, Empedocles threw himself into Mount Etna. Why? Supposedly to prove he had become a god. The story says he leaped into the volcano so nobody would remain behind, but the volcano betrayed him by spitting out one of his bronze sandals. Now this story is probably fictional. Ancient biographers love symbolic dramatic endings, but the myth survived because it perfectly fit his personality, a philosopher so theatrical and grandiose that even his death became cosmic performance art. Empedocles influenced an enormous range of thinkers. His four-element theory shaped ancient medicine, medieval alchemy, Renaissance science, Western occult traditions. Aristotle adopted and modified the four elements. The medical theory of four humors was deeply connected to his ideas. Even modern concepts of attraction and repulsion echo faintly through his cosmology. And philosophically, he helped bridge two worlds: the mythic worldview of a religion and the rational investigation of science. He stood at the border between mysticism and natural philosophy, both prophet and scientist. So why does he matter today? Because he represents something human: the desire to unify science, spirituality, cosmology, ethics, politics, and personal transformation into one giant version of reality. Modern thought tends to separate everything into categories. Science is here, religion is there, philosophy somewhere in between. Empedocles lived before those divisions existed. For him, understanding the cosmos was simultaneously scientific, moral, spiritual, and poetic. And maybe that's why he still fascinates people, because he reminds us of a time when knowledge itself felt sacred. Empedocles was one of the strangest minds in ancient history. He believed that reality was built from four elements, the cosmos was governed by love and strife, souls reincarnate endlessly, and lives emerge through natural combinations, and humanity was spiritually fallen. He mixed philosophy with poetry, science with mysticism, reason with myth, and somehow it worked. Not perfectly, not scientifically by modern standards, but powerfully. because beneath all the spectacle was a genuine attempt to answer the deepest questions imaginable. What is reality made of? Why does change exist? Why is there conflict? What is life? What happens after death? And most importantly, how do we find unity in a fractured world? His answer was simple. Everything is always being pulled apart by strife and drawn back together by love. A cosmic battle that in many ways still describes the human condition today.